Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, we're good.
Okay, we're ready to start then.
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul, and thank you for inviting me to do a program tonight. It's going to be a little different than your normal bird chat. Your bird chats usually zero in on a specific species or a migrating group. And my program is geared more toward the average person, whether you're a birder or not. And I tried to find some interesting things about some of the species. Some of them are common, some of them are not so common among the general public. This first photograph is my favorite, by the way. This was taken at a nest at Grant Pass Road in Kenansville. The nest, by the way, no longer exists. The tree died, and then a storm came by and blew it down. It's been several years, but you know, one of the things I always wondered is right now there are about 3 trees off Canoe Creek Road that are dead or dying, and I didn't know if there was any correlation to eagle's nests and dying trees, but that's just posing a question. I don't have the answer for that. I've also tried to introduce into the program tonight where most programs, they crop photographs. You see what the presenter wants to show you. So in some of these, I've showed you the actual photograph as it comes out of the camera, and even some of the settings, because I know I'm interested in how other people arrive at the same photograph. So here it is. I set this up many times, and finally the eagle cooperated, probably flew about 10 feet over my head. This was at Grant Bass in Kenansville. Now, I do veer from the subject of the Kissimmee Valley. That's just the way I am. If I find something interesting, I will present it. Prior to my presentation at Valencia College, I came upon these 2 gopher tortoises, and they look like they're having some kind of a opposite of a tug of war, pushing each other, but this is the way gopher tortoises fight. Their goal is to push the other one up and turn it over helpless on its back. I didn't have time to see the end of this, but there was a burrow nearby, so I surmise it was a fight over territory and whose burrow it was. So I'm going to talk briefly gopher tortoises, endangered species due to habitat loss. They like the scrub area and the sandhill areas. This photograph was taken at a local park near me where many gopher tortoises are relocated now in Orange County. They're plant eaters mostly, but what's interesting, they have these wild plums in the park, and when the plums ripen, they fall to the ground, and these gopher tortoises seem to know where they are and will eat them during the right time of the season. One of the questions you get a lot of times is how deep does a gopher tortoise build its burrow? And in fact, I asked this many years ago at a presentation, and by a husband and wife team, the Ashtons, who studied these many years ago. And the answer is the gopher tortoises digs to the water table. They like that humid, dark area below the surface. So if the water table is high, the burrow is shallow. If the whole water table is deep, the burrow is deep. They live to be 40 to 60 years old. And anyway, that's just an aside there that I thought I'd throw in, which I threw in another area. The area we're going to talk about tonight is what some people call the Kissimmee Valley or the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes. And it starts up here at 192 in St. Cloud, Canoe Creek Road, County Road 523, goes all the way down to 441. And at 441, you went south, you hit Yeehaw Junction, Highway 60. If you went north, you'd come out at Holopole. This first section of road between here and Cypress Lake Road is probably the busiest. We have an attraction that opened up years ago, Wild Florida. It has tremendously increased the traffic, not only on Canoe Creek, but on Lake Cypress Road. It's closed on Sundays, so that's probably the time, the one day you might want to go down there. I'll get into species and things like that later on. I'm just doing the layout of the area we're looking at. So when you leave Lake Cypress Road, you cross this ditch. You can see a spillway off to this side where you can see the Florida Turnpike. This ditch is Canoe Creek. So at one time, it was probably a nice picturesque creek, but all of these bodies of waters are connected through canals, spillways, and locks, and the water levels are artificial, depending upon how management decides to regulate it. When you go from Lake Cypress Road, the next stop is Joe Overstreet Road. It's a 5-mile road that leads to Overstreet Landing. This is probably the most popular place for wildlife in the whole area. If you travel slowly along the road, you can see deer, caracara, eagles, turkeys, and hawks. During the winter, whatever migrating birds you have, we have swallowtail kites you can see along this area. When you get to the landing, most people are interested in the eagles and the snail kites. And I can tell you right now, the snail kites literally don't exist here at the landing. They are primarily up on Lake Toho by Kissimmee, and you rarely ever see one here. You have to go out on an airboat to see a swallowtail kite. The eagles now are just starting to come back in the area, and you can see them fly out over and come back. So the eagle opportunities are increasing. The next stop is Prairie Lakes. Now I've eliminated I don't have the hunt club. There's a 3 Lakes Hunt Club, a hunt area where these hunters camp out, where you can also go to Prairie Lakes and you can see some red cockaded woodpeckers. But I just skipped down to Prairie Lakes. It has 2 nice 6-mile hiking trails, loop trails. You end up where you start, and there's all kinds of wildlife opportunities. They have a boat landing here on Lake Jackson, not only on, you know what, I'm going to change this, hold on. Where do we go here? Okay. All right, you can also, when you turn in here, you can go to Lake Jackson, which has a viewing platform, or you can follow the road all the way back till it ends and you can't go anymore. And you have a half-a-mile hike from there to another viewing tower, which is about 20-25 feet tall on the other end of Lake Jackson. So there's plenty to explore here. Now I'll show you some of the wildlife as we go on. And the last area that I'm going to talk about is Kenansville boat ramp, public boat ramp in Kenansville. This to me is really a not so traveled area where you find all kinds of water birds. Spoonbills come here as well as snail kites when they're around. Right now, there are a lot of ospreys on this lake, and the ospreys dive, and you get much closer photo opportunities than you would on Lake Kissimmee at Overstreet Landing. But I'm going to back up one. This is probably the least traveled of all the areas in the corridor. Sunset Ranch Interpretive Trail. It's 1 mile out to a viewing platform on Lake Marion, 1 mile back. So it's about a 2-mile hike. It's never been hunted. It was opened up as a interpretive area, and the signs and everything are very old, but you can see a lot of wildlife in this area. And many people don't realize that when the whooping cranes were released in Florida in 1993, I'm trying to remember the date, they started here in pens on this trail. And you can still see the fenced in pens and the observer platform there. It's all overgrown now with plants, but the non-migratory whooping cranes were released in this area. They also have a huge bat house at this area. And I have to qualify my statements because my knees have bothered me quite a time. So I haven't hiked this trail in 2 miles. So I'm giving you old information. Maybe some of you have hiked this, but this is certainly worth a trip if you have a history with the whooping cranes. So there we are. This is the area we're talking about. As soon as I figure out how to do this in the dark. So we're going to talk about sandhill cranes first, very common species that we have. There are two groups of sandhill cranes that come to Florida. We have a native species that here year-round nests here, lives here. During the winter, there's another group that comes in from the Michigan and Great Lake areas, and they don't mate here, they just come down for the winter. And you might have known larger flocks during the winter. I'm going to mention this whooping crane down here. For many years off of Joe Overstreet Road, this whooping crane was a fixture. You saw it for many, many years. And it was born actually on Lake Kissimmee, by the way, from two pen-raised birds in 2004. It was a female. And by the time it got to sexual maturity, the whooping crane program for non-migratory birds had ended. So it didn't really have a chance to mate. It was last officially seen in 2019 in January. Now, maybe some of you have seen it. I've heard stories. There was a botched capture one time to take it to the Louisiana colony. And I talked to the rancher there, and he was there at that day. They have not seen it since. So I don't know what the actual history of it at this time. It's presumed not alive, unless you can tell me something different. But they're basically 6 inches taller than the sandhill crane. The wingspan is a good foot and a half longer than the whooping crane. All right, sandhill cranes. They lay 2 eggs normally, incubate for 32 days. They mate for life, and they share responsibilities on the nest. Now, the one thing that was a big discovery for me, you see this word omnivorous. It means they'll eat anything. I always thought these sandhill cranes were these docile birds that only ate insects, seeds, certain roots of plants. I was at Overstreet Landing one day, and there was a limpkin with 5 or 6 babies. And this sandhill crane came by, immediately went over and got one of the babies and swallowed it. So that was my awakening to what the word omnivorous means. They're not any different than other animals and birds. They'll do what it takes to survive. So they like to build their nests in marsh. Here's a bird building a nest, piling up the plants, and there's a little bit of water here. They like the marshy areas. It dries up, makes a nice bed for eggs. They incubate, again, it's said for 32 days, shared by both male and female, although the female does most of the work. Once they hatch, immediately within 24 hours, they're expected to get up and learn how to survive, and they follow their parents. This is a couple weeks later. It's quite interesting. If you've ever observed the real young ones when they first start, they'll get tired because they can't keep up with the adults, and they'll just stop right there where they are and take a nap. And then when they're ready to go, the adults hang out around them, and when they're ready to go, they get up and they move on. I'm going to, this is, oh, wait a minute here. Missed a, I'm going to talk about caracaras here. And of course, this is not my photograph. I thought it would be appropriate, since I was doing the program, that I would use something local to your chapter. This is artwork done by Bob Cena, as you know. He's a tremendous artist. This actually won Best of Show in a Flagler Art Festival earlier this year. And in talking to Bob, he was a volunteer at Mead Gardens, which is a very popular birding place. I told him I would put in a plug. So you have coming up Grovember and Fall Festival in Mead Gardens. And if you haven't been there, I've never been there during this festival. This is their chief money-making program of the year. And Bob actually sells his drawings there and gives 100% of the money he takes in to Mead Gardens. So meadgardens.org. All right, let's talk about caracaras. These are cool birds. They remind me a little muscular eagles, but they're a member of the falcon family. And I think we associate them more along the road with roadkill and vultures and eagles than we do in other settings. However, they're competent and able to fend themselves regardless of the roadkill. The population in Florida is an isolated population, meaning that at one time in geologic history, the Florida West Coast was 100 miles wider than it is now during the Ice Age. And there was a corridor when animals and birds went back and forth from here to Mexico in the Southwest. Once the sea levels rose, the caracaras became isolated in Florida. And if it's not already happened, they are being looked at as a subspecies of caracaras. They pretty much range in the state from below Lake Okeechobee, around there in the central part of the state, all the way up to Seminole County. And I believe it's some of the birders in your chapter that have found the northernmost range of them right now. This bulge right here is not a deformity. It's a crop like most birds have. It's a large area on the esophagus and food is stored there. For some reason, it shows up on the caracara more than other birds that I have seen. Just one other thing, a lot of people call these Mexican eagles. It's not the flag, it's not the bird on the Mexican flag. The bird on the Mexican flag is a golden eagle, but it has some sacred meanings to the Aztecs of the past. And I think that's why it's revered in the Mexican area and why it's called the Mexican eagle. So here's the way we normally see it. This is an immature one. It takes a good 3 years for the immature one to become, take on its parents' looks. They nest in cabbage palm trees. Now I'm going to talk about banding using the caracara. It's important to report all banding of any bird that you see. It not only establishes wildlife migration patterns, but ages of birds, and I'm sure there's other information I'm not aware of. But you send it in, if you have a band, first of all, band reports at usgs.gov, that's United States Geological Survey. But when you send in this, a good photograph is important, but also you need to say, I saw this bird in Florida, because this bird may live in Alabama or Texas or somewhere else, and try to identify the city, the locale, anything you can about the definition of where this bird was found, an address, GPS coordinates. And I used to just send in these blow-ups, but now I've just learned to send in the full-fledged JPEG, and I let the people that are researching this go from there. And what they'll do, they'll research your bird and give you a nice certificate, electronic certificate, and with information the best they can about that bird. This bird I photographed on Deer Park Road, which is in the Mormon Ranch Company, a place called off of Doxey Road. And when I sent it in, I triggered a little bit of interest because Dr. Joan Morrison, who gave your keynote speech for the North Florida Birding Festival, is the one that has studied these birds in the state of Florida for 30 years. So I traded information from her. It turns out the bird was banded at 2 years old, and when I photographed it about a year ago, it was 13 years. So the bird is 15 years old. The other interesting part about it was the bird was banded on the Peavine Road next to Highway 60. And when I photographed it, it was 28 miles north on the Mormon Ranch Company. And I also gave them an address next door. And it so happens that in communication with them, this is James Dwyer. He was the graduate student for Joan Morrison studying caracaras with her. And he was gracious enough to send me this photograph among other information and a map. So here's what the bird looked like before it was banded. Here's what it looks like now, 13 years later. So again, banding information, give them as much detail as you can. Just another shot, somehow a fence post and a caracara go together. I often wondered where these birds perched before his fences and telephone wires. I know that's a silly thing, but those are things I think about when I'm out in the field. Another really nice bird is a scissor-tailed flycatcher. They come in from South America and Central America during the winter. And the ones you're going to see here are off Joe Overstreet Road. I'm aware that there are others in other parts of Orange County and other areas, but I can't really speak to them. And if you ever get one of these without a fence in there somewhere, you know, that's a pretty good photograph, regardless of how it comes in focus. They're beautiful birds. When somebody told me first about them, I was looking for a mockingbird size, but they're smaller than a mockingbird. And of course, they have a longer tail. Here's one in flight, beautiful red, burnt orange, and when the white and black and white of the tail is spread, it's a beautiful bird. They'll hover at times, zeroing in on the insect they're after, and they'll go down and get it. And of course, here's the shot, original shot, and here's the crop shot. And there's a front shot. I'm going to talk about anhingas here. Even though you see an eagle flying across, I was photographing the eagle, but when I looked at the photograph afterwards, I had the anhinga. I'll go to talk about eagles later if there's time, but I know you had a whole program on eagles not too long ago. So if there's time, I'll deal with it. If not, we'll just save it. Anhingas are called water birds or snake birds. Because all you see oftentimes is a neck above the water. And they have big web feet, and they swim underwater, and they spear their prey. And somehow they manage to flip the prey, in most cases fish, so that they'll swallow them head first. And you often see the anhinga in this pose, either on a tree branch, on a landing, on a fence post, whatever's close to the water. And a lot of people say they're drying out their feathers, which is true, but an anhinga has completely wettable feathers, meaning they get soaked when they go in the water. They don't have any shedding of anything like the water off of a duck's back. So when they're coming up here now, they're actually thermoregulating their body temperature because they don't have that protective warm air current with eider down close to their body. So consequently, you only see the anhingas in the southern parts of the US. And that's from the Birds of the World Cornell website. And here's one that had to climb up on a fence post in order to manage this bluegill. Now let's talk about cormorants. I kind of call them the counterparts of the anhingas. They have curved beaks. They catch their prey, they swim underwater, but their feathering system is completely different. They have both wettable and non-wettable feathers. And as you can see, when this bird came up from diving, there is water being shed there as if the feathers never got wet. There's a study by MIT, which I have referenced in the back, which details the feathering of the cormorants and how they're able to come up with dry feathers, combination of wettable, dry feathers, water pressure. I'm not sure I understood the whole thing, but you find cormorants in colder climates, much colder climates than you do the anhinga. Snail kites. This is probably one of the most popular birds that people like to see when they come down into the area, particularly Overstreet Landing. And I can tell you right now, they're not there. I think I already said that. But they fly over the water. The snails are usually attached a few inches underwater to the plant life, and the snail kite will see it, come down, grab it, and go to a post or somewhere and eat it. Now you notice this snail is floating in the water. The genus of the snail, the genus Pomacea, which includes both the exotic snail and the native snail, have both lungs and gills. So all it takes is a little bit of air to make one of these floats. And that's why this one was on top of the water. So they're great for survivors. They don't need the water to survive. And while they're on their way back to their perch, they'll switch the snail from their claws to their beak so they can land. And they pry open, the snail has a trap door called an operculum, and they'll pry that open and get the snail meat out of it. And as you've seen in these photographs, these are some of the most heavily banded birds that we have. The previous bird was male, these are females. And I like this picture right here, you know, for all you sushi eaters, you know, this is sushi on the half shell as nature intended it. But you can find out a lot. I try and send in the bands, and I did find a 13-year-old snail kite not too long ago by sending in the band, which is fairly old for a snail kite. Bird expressions. You know, there's that expression, an eagle never smiles. It looks like an eagle's always out to get somebody. These red-winged blackbirds are great descenders of their territory, and the snail kite didn't know what it was expecting when it came through and wanted no part of this red-winged blackbird. You know, mockingbirds will attack larger birds, as will grackles and others. And if I put an audio to this, would it be, ouch, get away from me, you know. This is the island apple snail. As far as I know, I'm not a snail expert. They lay about 2,000 eggs a pop compared to the native snail, which lays about 100 eggs a pop. And the eggs are white for the native area. And you can see in the right time of the season, all you see is pink. And that's a lot of snails out there. You can often see these early in the morning. They usually come up at night, wherever they are, lay their eggs. And in the morning, they're still laying their eggs. And I hung around once. I wondered, I know they have to crawl up there. I wonder what happened when they finish. When they finish, they just release and drop down into the water. They don't crawl back down in. So on a slow day, you can observe a snail. Limpkins also like snails. They don't have the beaks that the snail kite does. They'll feel the snails in the water, duck their head under there, bring it up, and they have to pierce the snail with their beak. And in this case, it's feeding its young. Back to a little bit about bird expressions. I like these for some reason. I look at this grackle, you know, and I think of one of these animated features with the evil witch after someone in its way. This where the limpkin wants nothing to do with it. These two limpkins are in a knockdown, drag out fight, but with the way their beak are, to me, it looks like they're having fun. Swallow-tailed kites. We're getting now to the end of the season. They come to the US from South America between February and March and leave in August and September. However, I heard some chatter tonight that some of these are still seen. I haven't seen any in a while. Most of the ones I see are on or in the Canoe Creek Road corridor. Once they leave their perch in the morning, wherever that is, they pretty much spend the day in the air. They'll preen in the air, they'll feed in the air. This one has a wasp nest. And a lot of times they'll dive down on these oak trees and pull up these tree frogs. They have a great vision. How they do that and make it happen so fast is amazing to me. Last year, I found this hay field. Now, hay in Florida is tall bahia grass. It's not the same hay you get from the West. But I was coming late one day, 5:30 or 6, off Canoe Creek Road, and I noticed these swallowtail kites were diving into this field and picking up insects. So I came back 4 or 5 nights in a row. It happened some nights, it didn't happen other nights. Oh, I'm sorry, keep hitting the wrong button. And that's not the same bird that dived. The one that dived didn't give me a good look, so I substituted another bird. So I thought this year, great, I'm going to stake out this field and get some great shots ahead of time. I didn't see a single bird in this field this year. So I don't know what happened. They changed their patterns. It might have just been a migrating group that had congregated in the area for a short period of time. They're very hard to photograph, by the way, because the top of their wings are black. The underside, you have shadows, but there's always that white head that sticks out in the sun. So much like eagles, you almost have to compensate for the head in order to get a decent shot of the whole swallowtail kite. This one, just another thing, as you see the insect in the front up here, you can see the legs coming down as it approaches the insect. Gets closer, the legs are forward, zap, it got it. And of course, I didn't see that insect when I was photographing the bird. I found it later. Sometimes you get lucky. This photograph, this year, was the first time I have ever seen a swallowtail kite not in the air. I know they've been perched many times and many of you have seen it before, but personally, I have not. A friend of mine called me one day and said, "Hey, Paul, I saw this," and I immediately went out the next day and was able to get some photographs. So that was a treat for me, but I know in certain areas, it's pretty common to see them perched. Purple gallinule. This is another beautiful bird in a way, because when the sun hits the feathers, you have that sheen that creates a nice glow, and it's a very pretty bird. They'll eat just about anything, but for some reason they like flowers. They like the unopened flowers of water lilies. This is at Overstreet Landing. This is in Lake Kissimmee. This is last week. I only show this because when you go to Overstreet Landing now, cattails are growing up in front of the platform. So it's hard to photograph a bird in the water because you're shooting through cattails. Most of the time you're waiting for an eagle or something high to come in. So if you haven't been out there in a while and you go there, don't be surprised there's a bunch of cattails in the way. And so I waited for this one to get into the sunlight, and I photographed this one just this past Saturday. Now I'm veering again away from the Kissimmee Valley area. There's a plant called alligator flag, scientific name Thalia geniculata. This is at Newton Landing and Winter Garden. And I've also seen this at the Circle B Ranch in Polk County. But it's a very tall plant, and this time of the year, these purple blossoms bloom. And these purple gallinules will go to all lengths, climbing up all these branches to get to these purple flowers. So if you happen to see these, they're not really prevalent along the Lake Kissimmee corridor during the Kissimmee Valley area. Swamp hens, thanks to a hurricane, these things were released from cages. They now survive like a lot of exotic animals in Florida. They're 2 or 3 times larger than a purple gallinule, and they have been known to prey on the water birds of other nests. This photo was taken at the headwaters marsh at Fellsmere, but I've also seen them at the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive. Haven't seen them on Lake Kissimmee yet, but it's possible some of you have. And if we've been talking about gallinules, I just thought I would show some pictures of what the common gallinule looks like. I guess you can't have a show of wildlife without an alligator in Florida. This is an alligator nest. They start mounting these nests up in June, lay their eggs, and they should be hatching here in anytime this month. The female alligator is much smaller than the male. It stands by the nest. They usually only get to about 7 or 8 feet long. This is from an airboat, Lake Kissimmee. And there's another one off Lake Kissimmee. This is about a 12-footer. But you know, if you go to the Popka Wildlife Drive, you see alligators all over the place. That's the place to show. Anyway, it seems like most of the people that go there show their friends alligators as opposed to interested in the other wildlife there. This is an older photograph, but again, you have to go out in the airboats to see this. When these spatterdock and water lily plants die, you know, the roots are embedded in the bottom. And eventually they will float up to the surface of the water. And with that, they bring the mud and the roots and things with them. And it creates a floating habitat. And it's a whole different ecosystem that you see than you are on shore. So in this case, you have an alligator, you have a snail. There's also a snail over here with a hole in it. That's probably a limpkin. I've seen baby alligators crunch on these snails. So I know that other animals eat them other than the ones I spoke of earlier. And some of the boat captains have seen the same thing. But it's really interesting to go out and see this habitat. Bobcats, don't see many of those. This was an older photograph. They are out there off Canoe Creek Road. You probably see more at the Popka Wildlife Drive and some other areas. White-tailed deer. This is probably one of the most common things you see along the drive anywhere on the main road or on the side roads. When you're driving regular speed, they don't care about it. As soon as you slow down to look at them or take a photograph, their heads go up. They know the difference between motor speeds. And if you're fortunate, you'll get a photograph. If not, you'll get a rear end photograph like you see up here. Of course, this is a buck. Deer lose their antlers every year. So when this will lose its ear next year, it will grow larger to whatever the height it's going to get ultimately. It has a velvet covering, which is during the growth period, and eventually the deer will rub that velvet off down to the bone of the ear. Now you'll have to let me know time-wise. I know we got started light, but just yell at me time-wise. Florida has its own species or variation of a wild turkey. And the wild turkey in Florida has a nice sheen to it, and there's a difference in the feathering. I don't have a good photograph of an eastern, an Osceola, or an eastern wild turkey. I was going to insert one from the web, but I just decided not to. And this is a tom turkey, of course, when it's Sunday go to meeting clothes, looking for a mate. By the way, when somebody first told me tom turkeys had beards, I was always looking up here. And then one day I look down here and I go, duh, how could I miss that? So this is a beard of a turkey. They're not hair, by the way, they're modified feathers. Kingfishers are just now coming down to our area. They seem to spend most of their time in North Florida and above, and you're starting to see them come south. I've seen a couple down in the Overstreet area already. The hover. And they go after a fish that they see. And in this case, this one caught a fish, and it will go sit down on a perch and eat it. Otters, it's not a common thing to see, but I put this in here because they do exist in the area. The two on the left are from Overstreet Landing. The The one on the right is from where I work at Valencia College. Most of the time you see them in the little creeks and culverts as you cross Canoe Creek Road, but it's not a common occurrence, but you do see them down there. This is what's now called the southeastern fox squirrel. Used to be called the Sherman's fox squirrel. It's two or three times larger than the gray squirrel, but they have great coloration. This is a lighter colored body, but it can be very dark at times. It's a cool looking squirrel. You never know what you're going to run against out there. One day there was just a swarm of bees on this post on their way to wherever they were going to establish a nest. Northern harriers, they come in during the winter and they cruise across the fields and looking for small mammals. And these actually were cruising on the lakefront in front of the viewing tower there. You have to pick these up quickly. A lot of times you don't see them till they're on top of you, and by the time you get the camera up, they're gone. So I was fortunate enough to see these in advance. But I have to tell you, in order to get these shots, I missed a million other shots. Glossy ibis. We have the white ibis and the glossy ibis here. And this is common like the purple gallinule in a way. When the light hits it, you get nice sheen colors. I had some flying ones, which maybe pronounce the colors better, but I like the layering of the feathers on this particular one up close. This is another cool bird, the green hair, and its neck is stretched out. Most of the time you don't see it with its stretched out neck. This is the way you normally see it. I don't know if you want to see that again or not. Sometimes they overguess their distance and they end up in the water too. This is at Shadow Bay Park, just to show you some of the precarious perches they use to get food. Some of your smaller birds that you see along the way. This is a red-bellied woodpecker. I know most of you know what this is, but the average person does not. You normally don't see the red-orange belly in front because it's always facing the tree. This is the red-headed woodpecker. We have bluebirds, we have year-round population, great crested flycatcher. These three are all in the same tree, not necessarily at the same time. When you turn off of Canoe Creek Road onto Joe Overstreet Road, there's a nice little pine forest on your right, just past the rancher's house. And it's a great place to stop and observe some of these smaller birds. Here's another sampling of smaller birds. I was in Prairie Lakes not too long ago. This cardinal landed on my mirror, had a deformed beak. This Bachman sparrow was also from Prairie Lakes. This towhee was also from Prairie Lakes, as was this common nighthawk from Prairie Lakes. If you drive into Prairie Lakes, one of the first roads you come, the second road you come to, first road after the bridge goes down to the boat ramp. But if you go straight for a couple of 100 yards, there's a lone pine tree there. In that stretch of road there, you encounter these Bachman sparrows, towhees, and some quail, and that's where I encountered this one, although this was probably a rarer occurrence than the others. We have great crested flycatchers. This was at the boat ramp off Lake Marion in Kenansville. Now this parula, I thought was flying to get an insect, and I just realized it was caught in a spider web. And it was up in the tree and I couldn't reach it. So I went to the boat landing and borrowed a fishing rod from fishermen, and I was able to bring it down and take the web out of the wing, and it flew away. But often we don't think about, or I don't think about, the perils of some of these smaller birds where an actual spider web can hinder them. How are we doing on time?
Pretty good. If you want to sail through the eagles, we're all enjoying it.
Oh, okay, all right, so I can, I'll try to go through this fast. We'll talk about the bald eagles. These are my favorites. The one on the front, the larger one, is the female. This is the male. We're into eagle season now, pretty much October 15th to May 15th. This is when most eagles have returned to their nest, repairing their nest. They mate, they have their young, and by May, they migrate back to wherever they go to. And an eagle is not bald. It comes from the English meaning white or a white patch. Eagles mate for life. They'll pick up a new partner if one of them happens to die. Florida has one of the larger nesting pairs of eagles in US outside of Alaska. And by the way, I didn't know this until I was getting into this program. Every state except for Hawaii has a bald eagle in it. Takes about 5 years for the eagle to have white head and tail feathers, a little longer for sexual maturity. So here we are, the female is on the right, the male is on the left. Now people tell me they can tell the male and female by different ways. I can only tell it when they're close together or by being observant on a nest. Maybe I can do it over time, but I can't do it. Just walk up to an eagle and say that's a male or a female. They have a mating ritual where once a male and female get together, they hang out, and at some point they lock talons and fall to the earth. And the idea is to release before they get to the earth. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they hit the ground, sometimes they hit a tree, and sometimes they have to look for another mate. It's not just male and female that do this, by the way. Two males will encounter each other as a challenge to the other one. I was out on a pontoon boat with Sam Mitchum, actually, and he's the one that spotted these. He's a good spotter, by the way. And he said, hey, look, and we just turned our cameras to that direction and started firing away. One day I hope to get some in closer. And the young practice this, by the way. They're always, you know, you see them flying upside. The young practice these things. This photograph was taken at Jover Street Landing just a week ago. I was on the viewing platform. When you see an eagle like this, they're sitting on eggs. Now, this is a shallow nest, low to the ground, and it's obvious, but sometimes your nest is deeper, up in the air. You might not even see the head, but you might see them get up and move around and turn the egg. So you have to watch sometimes the behavior of the eagle. If you spend some time watching a nest, you can pick this out. They incubate for about 35 days before the young are hatched. And here's that, yeah, they only had one, and they start feeding them carrion right away. Again, you might not see that young bird if it's a deep nest and it's high up until later on. But again, watch the habit of the eagle itself. If it looks like it's reaching down, feeding something, more than likely there's a young in the nest. When eagles lay more than one egg, typical is two. They're not laid on the same day. There's a day or two in between. So sometimes the first one up has the advantage because it's already learned how to feed. But sometimes one of them becomes a bully also and will keep the other one from eating. This is a nest, what we call the Renison nest, across Jover's, off Canoe Creek Road, across from the Circle Double C Bar Ranch. When I took this photograph, this is what you saw. I came back a week later, this one was gone. And I asked a friend to verify that because we pretty much travel in the same circles. And he didn't see it either. The only eagle that fled from this nest was this one. And here it is. So sometimes there's tragedy with the young. The best part about eagles is when they learn to fledge. They'll jump up and down, flap their wings. They'll get up in a tree limb of the nest, and they won't know how to get down. when they finally decide to leave the nest, they'll either fly out and come back to the nest or fly to another tree close by. And they haven't learned how to land yet. So they have these crash landings all the time until they learn how to control it. So here's that same nest. This is the Grant bass nest, by the way. Adult was eating something, all of a sudden the adult looks up and here comes this young eagle, pretty much crash landed right into the nest. People think that eagles only eat fish, but that's not true. Omnivorous, opportunistic, however you want to say it. There are some nests literally that their young pretty much get guts from roadkill and not many fish, or if they get a fish, it's from a pond and not from a lake. This is was taken at several years ago at Joe Overstreet Landing. Like, they also like cattle egrets. And it's not that eagles are such great flyers, and a lot of times the cattle egrets are much more maneuverable, but I think that the eagle just tires them out, which I believe this went on for a long time, back and forth, and they went way out of camera distance and way in. But anyway, I've seen in several occasions where they've taken cattle egrets to a nest. We're closing here to an end. These are a pair of eagles, which we call the South Eagles at Overstreet Landing. If you've been to the dock there, the dock is kind of the territorial line for the South Eagles and the North Eagles, even though it might not be true north or south. When they fly out from the left, the south, they generally return to the left. When they fly out from the right, they generally return from the right. I don't know, this is not an old photograph. It's maybe last season. Maybe this is January or February. And whenever I show these photos to friends, they love this sign, resume normal. But I wish they had a different post, like an artificial tree or something there to get a natural shot. And when I was presenting this to Valencia College, they said to keep it clean. So I thought I'd end the program. This is on Joe Overstreet Road, what we call the pond eagles. So it's taking a bath, and then the eagle left his feathers on, so there were no embarrassing moments. So there you go. I don't know if you have any questions or not, but I appreciate you having me. It's been very enjoyable.
You did a great job.
Thank you so much. We'll just take a few questions. I know that there was some in the chat. Do you want to read those couple that were in the chat, Susan?
Yeah, Carol had asked, where did you see that fox squirrel? Where did you take that picture?
I've seen them in a couple of, well, actually that squirrel's in 3 different locations. It hangs out at Joe Overstreet Landing at times during the year. So one of them is from there. The other one is from that pine forest I was talking about when you get off of Canoe Creek Road and turn onto Joe Overstreet Landing. And that pine forest on the right, that's a popular place. And one of the others was just along the way on Canoe Creek Road in a tree. So it was 3 different locations, but in the same area. By the way, I just saw a posting of one of those from Mike Fitzpatrick, and I don't know where he photographed it, but in the last couple of days, he photographed one of those from somewhere in that area, I think.
And then Delcy wanted to point out that another common bird are great horned owls.
Yes, you know, people don't understand why I don't have owls in my program. I've had people say, don't you have any owls? I don't know, I have a few photographs, but they are, you can find them at the landing, Joe Overstreet Landing. You have to get there very early or very late. In fact, a friend of mine called me this afternoon, and he got photographs of one late yesterday evening at Joe Overstreet Landing. So you have to be willing to stay late. They're on the light post or in the vicinity of the light post there. You just have to put your time in. Most of us go out in the morning, go home by noon, right? So you just have to change your routine and spend a little bit of time off hours.
Great. And we had a lot of comments about thank you and terrific photos and awesome presentation.
All right, I thank you again. I appreciate